Welcome everyone who is using Postgres. This is Postgres TV Open Talks series. And today we have a very interesting guest, Lætitia Avrot, right?
Yeah, right.
Welcome, Lætitia.
Hi everyone, hi Lætitia.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I forgot to mention you missed the last week, so I already excluded you from our.
As you do.
Right. So we are going to talk today about my favorite Postgres tool, client tool, psql, right?
Yeah, and it's also my favorite. But I found out not everyone knew how awesome it was.
Yeah, I believe here everyone is united in this regard, at least.
Right. So this will be like we will redo the talk that already was presented at some conference.
Yes.
In Belgium, I think, right? Or
it was presented in Belgium, but it was also presented in Orlando, in Milan. Well, several dates, and each time I added a couple of slides.
Improvements.
Yeah, of course. But I didn't want to add too many things because you can't sell everything about PSQL in 1 hour. Yeah. But I will try to point out those cool tips and tricks that will make you more efficient with it.
Right.
So 1 hour, it would be like SQL Plus from Oracle. It would be like several days, and still you would be not that efficient.
Right, but I need to remind that despite of the fact that we are redoing the talk, we are not limiting our guests. So feel free to use any speed of presentation, and we will provide as much time as you want. And as usual, only few people watch us live. Unfortunately, much more will watch this recorded. Those who watch us live, please feel free to ask questions anytime. We will be monitoring the chat. And others, please provide your questions in comments below. We will also monitor them after the session recorded. And of course, as usual, I remind everyone to subscribe. I've noticed more than 50% watch our videos not subscribed. This is not fair. So please subscribe, like, and share our videos in your social networks and groups where you discuss Postgres. Okay, I think it's time to start, please.
Okay, I will share my screen.
We see it.
Okay, great. We'll speak about PSQL and how awesome it is. I'm very comfortable with having question asked in the middle of my talk, and that's better because we have context with the questions. So feel free to ask any question. I will try to answer them live. First, just a little about me. My name is Lætitia Avrot. I'm a PostgreSQL recognized contributor. I'm also the founder of Postgres Women. It's an informal group trying to help any woman we can to enter the Postgres community, to attend events, to speak at events, and so on. And I'm a field CTO at EDB. Field CTO means that I'm a CTO, I'm not a CTO, I'm just helping the CTO with some very technical things. Just if you haven't attended any talk with me, you might not know that my slides are quite pure without any bullet points. Why? Because I'm a mom, and when I speak, I'd like to be listened to. And I found out that most people were not able to read that bullet points and listen to me at the same time. And it was infuriating seeing people trying to read without listening to me. So I removed every bullet point from my slide decks. But I found out that some people needed these bullet points just to keep to be able to follow the talk. Maybe you have some hearing disorder. Maybe you have some attention disorder, maybe you simply just used to follow a lecture with bullet points. So what I do is I share a slide deck with bullet points. You will find this exact slide deck on mydba.notebook.org. Then you will find a conf.tol tab, and you will find the slides with bullet points there. Feel free to go there and look at them. And you will, I hope that will help you. And it's also more interesting to share those, because sharing slides with images and no bullet points is not that useful. So that's why I share slide decks with bullet points. And last point is you can follow me on Twitter. This is my personal account, but I try to add things about databases, but you might find also kitten videos and unicorns and everything that makes internet so great. So about that talk, what happened with PSQL? What I found out is people didn't know that PSQL was awesome. Right? When I say people, it was not expert people. Every Postgres expert I've seen in this world agreed that PSQL was the best client tool for Postgres. But I found out that less expert people didn't find it so useful. And when I dig into that, I found out that they weren't using the cool tricks and tips that make it really useful and really efficient. So I built a website. It's called psql-tips.org. And you can go there and you will have a tip, and it will select this tip at random. And you can either have another tip or just see them all. At the moment, I have 125 tips, but very soon I will upgrade that to 150. And when I will be over, it should be between 200 and 300 tips. So
yeah, I remember when you published this, it was like it was great. I mean, this is great. I also think it's worth checking how many tips you already know if you consider yourself advanced Postgres user, right? So
yeah, and actually, I learned a lot by doing this website, so it's great. So let's first begin with the first question somebody not using PSQL will ask. Why? Why would you use PSQL? It's a command line tool, it's old-fashioned, and the learning curve is more difficult and slower than with a GUI tool. So why would you slow yourself down in the beginning? Why would you do that? A GUI tool, you can in 5 minutes, you know how to use it. You don't need more than 5 minutes. For a command line tool, you will need, just to use it basically, you will need around 1 and 2 hours just for basic usage. So why would you do that? And my answer is several points. The first one is command line tools are more feature rich than GUI tools. Why? Because when you have a GUI tools and you want to add a feature, you need to find a way to add this feature in a menu, in a button, and you need this to be readable for a human and so on. Whereas with a command line tool, either you will add a flag or you will add a meta command, but that's really easy to be done. You don't have to think so much. So most of the time you will find more features in command line tools than in the GUI tools. Then I'm a former production DBA. And when you're in production, you want to record everything you do. It means recording all your inputs and all your outputs. But if you're using a GUI tools, it means that you will have a video of you clicking somewhere on some button and so on. And it won't be that easy to look at. Whereas with a command line tool, it's all text. You will have text in input and text in output. And everything can be stored safely in a text file, and you can look in them. You can search for keywords, and that's more efficient. And you can copy paste too. So when you have to write a report to a customer explaining what you did, it's almost already self-written. And I love that efficiency. The third point is scripting. When you're in production, you don't play with a GUI because you want to limit the risk of errors. And clicking on a button in a GUI, depending on the complexity of the window and so on, it can be risky. Whereas having a script that you have tested several times and playing it on production is less risky. My fourth point is that command line tools are more efficient when you know how to use them, because you will keep forgetting in which menu you will find that particular feature in a GUI. But with a command line tool, you will have easy ways to find out what is the name of the flag or things like that. So you will be more efficient and you will be faster with a command line tool. And when it comes with production and production disaster, being fast, doing what you know you need to do is really important. And the last point I have, it's way cooler to use a command line tools in terminal. When I'm working in a public place, like an airplane, for example, the other people around might think that I'm actually hacking into the airplane system. How cool is that? And let's talk about how I set up my desktop when I work on terminal. First, if you used to work with terminals, that you know that one of the tool you need to have is a terminal multiplexer. I use Tmux, and I use that so much that it's integrated in my .zshrc file, so that each time I begin a new session, it will automatically begin a Tmux session. And I use Tmux because on top of Tmux, I added a Tmux logging plugin, which will record everything, output and input, so that everything will be in a file. And as I said, it will be more easy to write a report for customer. And what I love with terminal multiplexer is you can split your screen. Typically, I work in 4 screens on my big screen, and I split my window in two screens in my little screen. So most of the time I have a VI window with my query, and I have a PSQL window on the other side. So here you see on the left, you have the VI window with the query, and on the right, you have PSQL, where I can query the catalog to remember the column names, to have help about SQL commands and so on. And after that, I just have to play my query that is written on my VI file. So that's how I work with PSQL. And from now on, it's been proven the most efficient thing to do, because I know there are plugins to use PSQL inside VI, but it's not that efficient for me. So I'd rather use PSQL on a separate window. So the first thing a newbie will want to do with PSQL is to connect. As said, PSQL is a client. As every client with Postgres, you need to specify how to connect. And how to connect is basically 4 things: a host, a port, a username, and a database name. Let's talk about hosts. The first flag is --host or -h, and then you will give it the host name or the host IP. So for example, here I used localhost, and you can see that I'm actually connected using localhost. If you don't want to explain each time which host you want to connect to, you can safely export the environment variable PG host to hold that value for you, so that when you will connect, it will use it but you won't have to repeat it each time. So that's something you can do on user environment in recipe or production settings. If you don't provide anything and you don't have the PG host environment variable, then it will use a socket connection with the /tmp directory. You can also specify another socket directory by using the --host or -h flag and displaying a value that begins with a slash. Then Postgres will interpret it as a socket directory. The port. So the easy way to do it is to use --port or /p. So here the port is 5433, and you can see that I'm connected using the port 5433. As you can have an environment variable for host, you can have one for ports. So that's PG port, and you can display the value you want. And actually, I'm using this value to connect as 5433. If you don't provide anything, the default value is 5432. The user. Either you can use --username or --U with the value of the username. And you can see here that I'm connected using the user test. You can use the environment variable PG user, and it will work the same way. If you don't provide anything, then PSQL will use the OS username. So here I was connected as an OS user called Lætitia. And so it looked for a database user named Lætitia. And luckily it existed, so I was able to connect, and you see that my username is Lætitia. The database name. So there are three ways to give a database name to PSQL, either without any flag or with the flag DB name or D, and then the database name. So here you see I'm connected to the database test. You can use an environment variable, PG database, and I'm connected using this environment variable. If you don't provide anything, then it will use the username as the database name. So as I said, the username, as I didn't provide any username here, it will be the same as the OS user, Lætitia. So the database, the user is Lætitia, the database user is Lætitia, and so it's looking for a database named Lætitia. Again, I'm lucky because it does exist. You can go further. You can use connection strings. So here is a typical connection string, but I don't like that one because it's not really meant for human. It's meant for robot to be parsed. But let's see how it works. So first you have the PostgreSQL keyword, and then you see that you will have the user, and then the host, the port, and the database name. We have a better human readable connection strings. It's key value connection strings. So here you will use for each key the appropriate value. That's really human readable. User equals the username, host equals the host, port equals port, DB name equals DB name. And you see that PSQL will pass it and retrieve the values and use them to connect. That's how you can connect if you want to connect 1 or 2 times. But what if you have a whole bunch of instances you want to connect to on a regular basis? You don't want to have to remember the local host, the host, the port, the database name, and so on. What can you do? There is a solution, and it's called service file. And in my opinion, it's not used enough. A service file is a file, a text file, where you will describe the name of the service, and then you will describe how to connect to this service. I love it. So you see here, I used service equal and the name of the service, and it will effectively use the host, the port, the user, and the database names that I provided. But what's great with service files is that you can give them to a colleague. When there's a newbie in your team, you simply give the service file and they can connect to every instances they have to work on. You don't have to give the details for each instance or for each database. That's very useful, and I'd love to see this more used in companies when I go there. But for now, I've seen this used once in more than 15 years of consulting, so that's not a lot. And that's all about how to connect using PSQL. Now that you're connected, you have to know that there are two modes in PSQL.
Yeah, before we continue, we have a question. I probably will add my question to it. The question is, what's the difference between options lowercase u and uppercase u? I guess the answer will be that lowercase u doesn't exist, right? For
yes.
PSQL. But let's discuss my question then. Why capital? Why uppercase u? Right? Why did
I have no idea, and
right.
Actually, we have a problem. When I say we, the Postgres project has a problem with how we handle connections with clients in Postgres. It's not it was not widely thought. So each one added their clients with different ways to connect, with different ways to provide a host, a port, a database, and so on. For example, pgbench, when you use -d,
yes.
it's not the database name. And you have things like that.
It's debug mode.
Yeah,
right?
It's a debug mode. So I wanted to fix it, but that's not easy. And it will likely break a lot of things because the ID, and it's not mine, it's Vic Fearing's ID, but I think it's a great idea, was to create a whole new client to rule all the other clients, so that you have only one way to connect, and then it will call the right client.
Right, and some packages, pgbench, I think maybe on Ubuntu, it's even not considered as client program. It's client program, but it's packaged inside, inside server package.
Yeah, that's wrong.
And this -d problem, I hit it so many times. I don't like it at all, right? So.
Yeah, so it needs to be fixed. We're on it. It will take a lot of time.
I actually have an idea why it's /u. Good old times, it was an idea that if you have short option and a long option, short options is started with lowercase, and the long option started with lowercase, and its short version started with the uppercase. The same thing with version, the same thing with username, and so on and so on. But at some point, as you do in open source project, this style idea was abandoned.
Yeah.
So only user has it, because database, host, port, they all are lowercase.
Version, for example, has it. Some other parameters too, I believe.
Yeah, version is uppercase. -v. So let's go back to PSQL, which has two modes. And the first one I will speak about, I won't speak a lot about it because you will have to find out if you need it. You will have to dig into it. So you don't need my help for that. I will work more on the interactive mode because there are GUI alternatives that are not so good, but you might be tempted to use instead of PSQL. Whereas for the shell or batch mode, there is no alternative, so you will have to do it anyway. So just when I say shell or batch mode, it means that once you will have entered the command, it will just exit after having done what you asked it to do. So for example, here, I will simply send a query and it will display the value. You will see here the value, the result of the query, and it will exit the program. So the -c is for command. I don't use that a lot, but it's very useful if you want to test if you can connect from a replication host to the primary, because you can simulate a replication connection using this -c identify system -d replication equals true DB name equals Postgres. Then it will simulate a replication connection. So that's a very handy trick just to test that you can connect and the firewalls are open, the ports are open, and everything works great. And after that, you can set your replication settings. Normally, the typical, if it works, the typical result output is that. Now, the batch mode is most of the time used when you have your queries in a file. So let's see how you can do that. So let's say I have this query, select star from test in a file called query.sql. I can call it using -f, F for file, very simple. And then it will display the output here in the standard output. And most of the time that's all you need. If you need more, I'm sure you will use the manual, you will read them to find the option you need, and you won't need me for that because there is, as I said, there is no alternative, so you will have to do it anyhow. Let's go to the interactive mode, which is the one I want you to discover. First, sorry, oops. Here, when you connect, so here I connect with the user test on the database Lætitia, you see that there is some kind of a prompt at the beginning of the line. So what does this prompt means? Because it means something. So let's explain the default prompt. You can change it, and if you want to change it, I really encourage you to go to the documentation of PSQL to find out what variable to set to change the prompt. But first, you have by default the database name, the database you're connected to, because in Postgres you can have several databases. So it might be important to remember on which databases you're connected, in particular when you have these weird instances, when you have development databases and production databases on the same instance, which is a bad practice of all the time, but we know that it happens. So that's a good remember on which database you're connected to. Then you have, let's say, a token. For now, it's an equal sign, but we'll see later that it can change. And after that, I call that separator, but again, this separator can change, and I will explain how. So first, the first mistake newbies make is they forget to end their queries with a semicolon. So let's say they write select star from test, enter, and then Postgres just replays the prompt, but they miss to see that the helping token changed. It's not an equal sign anymore, it's a minus. And this minus is really important because it means we are waiting for the end of your query. And as there is no semicolon, it's not the end of the query. So typically what a beginner will do is it will again write the query, select star from test. And maybe this time they won't forget the semicolon. And then they will have a syntax error because select star from test, semicolon is not valid SQL. And they won't understand why they had a syntax error, because for a human, it's easy to understand that the intention of a human was just to use the query select star from test, but it's a computer. Computers are stupid. So if you have a minus, remember to finish your query, and maybe you just need a semicolon at the end. If you have an open parenthesis, it just means that you opened a parenthesis and PSQL is waiting for you to end it. It's just a reminder. If you have a quote, a single quote, it means you open the quote and PSQL is waiting for you to close it. Same with double quotes. Just remember that in standard SQL, quotes are for strings, but double quotes are for identifiers, meaning object names, database object names. Don't use double quotes for string because you will have a syntax error. If you begin a transaction between the equals and the separation character, you will have a star. Well, depending on which version of Postgres you are. I think this is what I did in Postgres 14. And if you're connected as an administrator instead of the superior mark as the separator character, you will have a hashtag. It's a reminder that you're connected as an administrator, which can make the difference when you're working in production. So be careful when you have a hashtag, you have superpower, and you can do mass destruction on your database. So
I have not a question, but addition. I actually used all these things, not noticing. I mean, quote, double quote, and I've just checked the dollar. You know, like dollar for strings, all dollar blah blah dollar.
Yeah.
It also works. Interesting.
Yeah, and I strongly encourage people to use dollar strings instead of quote strings because it's way more useful. Here, some basics. So the commands in PSQL are either SQL command that you already know, select, insert, truncate, create, alter, whatever, and meta command. Meta commands are commands specifically for PSQL to do special things. And the first one that you might want to know is how to exit PSQL. So it's \Q. Q comes as quit. But too many people complained because they were stuck in PSQL, and we added exit. So exit will work in PSQL from Postgres 10. If you need some help, just type help. It will give you an access to all the SQL commands you can enter. With an interactive help, you can do help, alter, trigger, and it will give you the correct syntax for alter, trigger. If you use interrogation mark, then you will have access to all the meta command of PSQL. So remember, help is for SQL command, interrogation mark is for meta command in PSQL. And if you want to use a meta command for help, instead of using the word help, just use \h. It's the same thing as \q is the same thing as exit. Then when you're using PSQL as it's a tool for gigs, there are a lot of settings, really a lot of settings. But the first thing we will see is how do we use variables in SQL. So simply use \set, the name of the variable and the value of the variable. You also have a special set meta command for displaying output. You will use \pset, and the variable here will be the ones listed in the documentation. It's very specific variables for displaying output. For example, you can use pset format HTML to output the query result in HTML table. And you will have some environment variables for PSQL that you can use with /set_env and the variable value. So first, how do we set a variable? So here, for example, I created a variable named setting name, and I put into it the value wall. So that when I use that variable, so select name setting from PG settings where name. So I use the tilde, it's for a regular expression. And when you use a variable in PSQL, you need to use a colon. And as it's a string here, I will use single quotes around it. So I have colon, quote, setting the name of the variable, and I end the quote. And PSQL will be very happy to give me the result of my query. So that's all the settings in Postgres using the word wall. As you see, there are a lot of them. You can, of course, use these variables in SQL queries stored in a file. So here, if I display the file queries3.sql, you see that I use the variable setting name, and I can use PSQL in batch mode with the -- variable flag just to give the variable a value. So you will simply use the variable name equal and the value you want to assign it to. And then it will give you the result of your query, and it will exit PSQL. There are other variables. For example, here I just used a simple query, select name from PG settings limit 10. And I want to know how many rows I had as a result. And you have this special variable, row count, then you can select. And it will give you the number of rows of the previous query. What you can see also, and some might be surprised by it, there is no from in this query, but it's perfectly normal. The SQL standard does not make the from part of a query mandatory. So you can simply select a value, and it will give you the value. Then you can set some special values. For example, the comp keyword keys environment variable, I love it because by default, when you try to autocomplete your SQL in PSQL using tab, it will autocomplete is in uppercase. But I'm, as you've seen, that I'm working with VI. So when I try to autocomplete, I want it in lowercase because I have a plugin in VI that will use syntax scoring for my code. So I don't need my SQL keywords to be in uppercase. So I will set this variable to lower so that each time I autocomplete, it won't try to make it in uppercase. We will talk about this one later, but it's really great for beginners to learn how the Postgres catalog and Postgres metadata are working. This one is interesting. By default, in Postgres before Postgres 15, so Postgres 15 should be released in October this year. When you have multiple queries separated by semicolon, then Postgres will just give you all the results. But what if you only want the last query result and you don't want the intermediate result? Then you can use from Postgres 15, show all results and give a value to off. The default is on. But if you put off to that variable, then it will display only the last query result. Oh, that's one of my favorite. I hate the page rows shipped by default with PSQL. I use my terminal multiplexer. I know how to use it. I know how to use the history. I don't need a pager. And if I have too many results, it's on me, and it's because I'm working on my SQL query, and I will reduce the results to something that I can see, or I will export them in a file or whatever, but it's on me. I don't want a computer to try to be smart and to try to display it in what it thinks it's a most efficient way, which it is not. So I always set the pager to off. Yeah.
Have you tried PSPG alternative?
I haven't, because as I said, I don't need a pager.
Right.
I don't want it. Because most of the time when I query, and again, I'm not working in production anymore, and when I am, I don't have the right to touch anything. So my queries normally shouldn't be more than 4 to 5 columns and more than 10 rows. And if it's more, it's just because I'm building my query. So I want the result, and I will sort it out. I really hate how a pager tries to be good for me, whereas it's no good for me. It's not efficient, and it makes me lose time, and I hate that. Then, as I said, I work with Vim. So I set the PSQL editor to Vim. You can, of course, use the editor of your choice. I strongly suggest Vim or Emacs because, as I said, PSQL is also about being more efficient. And if you use Nano, then you will lose that efficiency. So just again, as if you have the will to learn PSQL and be more efficient with that kind of tool, you will have the will to learn Vim or Emacs. And I love this one. You can set in PSQL how it will display the null value. And that's always difficult to display the null value because, yeah, it's null. The default is an empty string, which is not so good. You can put whatever value you want, just make sure that it's not a value you will find in your database. That's why I love putting emoticons as a displayed null value, because it's at the moment unlikely to have an emoticon in your database. And so when you will select a null value, it will display the emoticon you chose. So now that we've seen rapidly some tip and trick about how using PSQL, let's see how you can get information about your cluster, about your database, actually, your databases and database. So the first one is \l. It will list all your databases. You can add the plus modifier. It will give you useful information like the size of your databases. So if you're a production database and someone asks you the size of the databases on that cluster, you don't need to forge a complex query. You just need \l+, and that's done. How efficient is that? I don't know more efficient tool to have that. \d is for describe, and you have several flavors of it. But if you use \d and an object name, it will give you details about this information. Each time you will be able to add a plus to have more information. For example, \d plus test will give you a lot of information about the table test, the column names, the primary keys, and so on, and the data types, everything. And you will also have \dn. So that one might be difficult to memorize because n is for schemas. But it's for schemas because in the Postgres project, often we use the namespace for schemas, because schemas in the standard SQL standard are nothing more than a logical isolation of data. So it's actually a namespace is a great name for schemas. Then T for table, so it will give you information on tables. For example, /DT test will give you information on the table, not the same as /D test, because /D is for describe, by the way, forgot that. /D test will give you detailed information like the column names, and you will have information on all columns, whereas /DT test will give you information on this table, the owner of the table, the size of the table, and the table space on the table, and so on. /df, F for function, it also works for stored procedures. And this is how you can use the echo hidden variables that we've seen. You see that when you use /DT test, Postgres PSQL will send a query. You have the query here using the catalog tables, PG catalog here, PG class, which is the main table where all objects of Postgres are stored. And by looking at this query, it means that you will be able to modify it. You will be able to learn a lot about the Postgres catalog. That's really useful for beginners. And then you will have the result of the query, of course. So you see for the table, you will have the schema, the name, type, and the owner of the table. The type can be a partition table. It can be a foreign table, and so on. So another thing that I love, and that's also one of the reasons I hate pages, is because it won't make me format how the output how I want. So first, \x is for extended data, and we will see later what the extended format is. X is and the extended format is, and \j will repeat the last query. It will repeat the query in the query buffer. It will execute the query in the query buffer, or the last query if the query buffer is empty. So let's say here that I used a query, and as I said, that's typically a case where the pager will be involved. And because there are too many columns, it's not human readable at all. But then what you can do very easily is \jx, so it will replay the same query, but then it will use the extended format that will use for each column a row to display the data, with the header of the column here and the value here. And then you will have record 1, and if you have several rows, you will have record 2, and so on. So that's very useful when working with a lot of data. As I already said, you can format your output the way you want. So you can format it CSV, you can format it HTML, you can, we will see later, there are several output formats you can choose. But one of the interesting ones I've seen is the HTML format. Why is it interesting? Because you can put that in a file and send it to a customer, and they will be able to see the data with no specific application other than a browser. But we know that normally all my customers has a browser in their desktop. So that's a really good way to share data. They can copy paste the data from a HTML file very easily, because the other way to share them is a PDF, but that's not that easy to copy paste from a PDF. With HTML, they can simply copy paste them into their spreadsheet tools and so on. That's a really nice way to share data with someone. Then you have the unaligned format, because as you see by default, it tries to align the columns, which is a mess here. And you can decide that you just want the data separated by pipe without aligning them. You can use the CSV format. That's also a great way to share data, but you might end up with problems when your customer won't be able to open it in Excel because Excel uses a very specific CSV format, which is not standard. You might have problem with quotes and things like that. So that's why I still recommend the HTML format to share data. Of course, as I say, you can put the output of your query in a file. So here I use \O for output, and then that's the file query out.csv, \G to just repeat the query buffer, and everything will be set in my file. You see that I use \! here. \! is to play any shell command. So here I used cat. Just to make it quicker, \O with a file name will open the file and write every following result into that file. But most of the time, what you want is just to output this query result in that file, and then you will need another file for another query result. In that case, you can use \G with the name of your file. And that's funny because I just learned that today. So that's really a great feature just for one time. If you want just to take the result of this query, put them in a file and close the file, just use \G and the file name. And here, you can also have a file with your query, and you can use \I with the file name. And then, as I haven't changed the \O file name, it will still put the value in the same file. You see, you have the first query result here, and then you have the second query result here. If you want to stop sending every output into your file, just use \O without any parameter, and it will stop writing into your file. History. So
can I add something? Because I love these options I and O. I just to add, IR is relative, so sometimes if you advance, and I also like very interesting feature is \O with pipe, and you can send it to some program, and this adds. If this opens new possibilities. For example, we wrote a small program that sends output to explain the Lebo or explain Depeche to visualize immediately right from psql. So like it's
and you can do the exact same with \G. You can use \G pipe and a shell command.
Ah, right. Interesting. Yeah.
So interesting. That's today. It's tips number 135, something like that. Not published yet. History. As if you've already worked with a shell, you know that what's really important is your history of commands. And you can use the history in PSQL with the up arrow to up and down arrow to navigate your history, or you can use Ctrl+R to search into your history, the exact same way you're using it with shell. So please use it. That's really useful and it can save you a lot of time. That's a really funny trick. If you send a query here, select comes from pgstat activity. So pgstat activity is the table where you see who's connected and who's doing what. And with workloads, you can use watch with a number of seconds here, and PSQL will repeat the query every n second. So it can be very useful. Another thing that was infuriating before is when you were trying to use a function, for example, here, I'm using sum on setting. and it tells me there is no functions that match the given name argument types. So what I did was I just played my query without the sum, and it looks like integer to me. But if I use \g_desk, it will use the query, it will look at the last query result and will give me the name of the columns and the data types of each column. It won't replace the query, actually. It will use its memory. So that's very useful. And with that, I'm able to complete my query by using a cast here so that it can sum. Just here, I begin a transaction, and then just to show you that my table test is owned by my owner, Lætitia. But what if I want to change all the tables owned by Lætitia? I want to change the owner to a user called test because it was a mistake. Lætitia is a super user. I don't want a super user to be owner of a table. That's something we do a lot when we are production DBA, writing DDL out of SQL queries. So here I use concatenation with the table name just to write the DDL. And the result of the query is some DDL. What if I want to play this SQL query, the DDL generated? Of course, you can copy paste the result. You can output the result in files and play the file, but we have better. You can use \g exec, and it will play the query and play the result of the query. And as you see here, my table test now is owned by test. And as it's Postgres, everything is transactional, and I can roll back my alter table. And that's all I have for now. I hope I will be able to add other slides after this. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them so I can answer them.
Question is like it's a tricky question actually from me. Do you use it's possible to use psql-rc file to specify to put some set and other commands to prepare your PSQL for like to put it in better shape? Do you use this file on production?
Yeah. So I have a simple answer for that. I'm a consultant. I'm not a production DBA anymore. I can't change my customer setting. And most of the time, actually, I found out that my customer have not set anything. So even on my laptop, I don't use a psql-rc because I want to be ready for what I call hostile environment, which is a very plain PSQL without any settings, so that when I'm called at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm ready to work. I know how to do that. And there's nothing that will surprise me about how it will answer. I want to be used to use a plain PSQL without any customization.
Right. This is very wise. And I had cases when I for example, we prepared some script for psql and we tested it well, but when we deploy it and in production, there is some couple of lines in psql-rc. So we learned hard way that we need to use $X, right? When you script, when you do some scripting. This is very you discuss so many good things, but when you start using it, be prepared to turn everything off.
My suggestion in this case is actually to have some sort of two configs, a very light one and a normal one. The normal one you use on your laptop or something like this, and another one you just prepare yourself to use very basic settings. Just like many DBAs are used to VI, not classic Vim. just because suddenly they can end up in some HP UX server, the customer, which only has VI, and VI is everywhere.
Right, but to configs, it's good if you control everything. But as Lætitia mentioned, if you consultant and if you go to
basically the second config is no config.
Right, but what if some people created config that you don't expect? So dash capital X is good, very good thing to turn everything. Yeah. We have a question in chat about pgservice.conf file. It looks like it doesn't work on Windows.
It does work on Windows. I used it even with pgadmin, which is in my knowledge the only GUI tools that can use service file. But you have to use the pg service environment variable to point to your service file path.
So it should be described in the documentation, I guess, right?
Yeah, I could add that. Yeah.
Good. Okay, I don't have any more questions. Do you, Ilya? Maybe a question or no?
I would say that was quite comprehensive, and I actually in real life use less features of PSQL than Lætitia does, so I probably do not have any questions.
Good. And yeah, I will update psql-tips very soon, and I will try to work on it to have it updated more frequently than what I did last year. It was a busy year. I guess Nikolai is frozen.
He forgot /x and got too much of output, I believe.
Okay.
Well, but anyway, yes, he is frozen, but I remind you that that was a Postgres TV, and you still can subscribe. You still can ask questions to our speaker, to Lætitia, in this case, even offline. If you see us as a record, you can put your questions into the comments, and we try to reach Lætitia to get the answers. And as you do, subscribe, and see you probably next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.